Here he is. Peter, minus glasses today.
They're here.
How are you? I've been looking forward to this session. It's good to see you. Thank you so much for being involved today.
That's very good of you. It's good to be here.
So, Peter, I've had the preliminary chance to have a look at your life memoirs. They are brilliant, you know, and I've seen some of the reviews as well that have been sent through. You know, people talking about the humility, the authenticity, the brilliance, you know, and also just like the amazing stories that you have from your life. It's been challenging to bring them all together into one book?
Yeah, it's taken me probably 5 years. I've gone to it, left it, come back to it, gone back to it, and so on. Then when you go to places, it often reminds you of things that happen there. So visiting is a good idea to a place, and it brings back memories.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about that. I mean, one of the things that really came to life for me was like young Peter. You know, you transported me into sort of the I take it's like 1950s West London, growing up around Shepherd's Bush, your sort of like excursions to Wimbledon, to Alperton, and these characters in your life, you know, the love and support of your mum and dad and other people that were around you.
Also, my Welsh grandmother was very important to me.
Yeah, is she the one that had the name for you?
Pardon?
Is she the one that had the...
Well, she used the word bach, which I believe in Welsh means love, little one. But you can use it, use it with children, but understand that I believe, dropping names, Gareth Edwards, the rugby player, said that he calls his wife Bach, and also and his wife the other way. So in Welsh, she spoke Welsh, and she would sing to me in Welsh after I had that treatment for scoliosis.
Yeah, I mean, that was the interesting thing for me, that I think you talk about your dad and your uncle as well being exceptionally bright at school, but not having the chance to go to university. He went to grammar school, I think, for of his own
grammar. Yeah, he matriculated. Those days, to matriculate, you had to pass all 9 subjects well. If you failed one, you didn't matriculate.
But he didn't get the opportunity to then go to university because his mum and dad needed him to work, right?
Ben, who married my dad's twin sister. Right, they because they had to go out to work with 7 kids in Chiswick at the time, which isn't as wealthy as it is now. They had no opportunity to go there. They had to go out and work and help support the family. There have only been 2 bedrooms with 7 children.
Yeah. So I mean, how was it for you as a youngster then, growing up in in an environment, a very, I think
well, that was before the war, of course.
Yeah. So
then my father found himself going off to war to India within 2 years, of completing really at Chiswick Grammar.
Yeah. And so what was it like for you growing up in that environment? Did you always believe that you were going to become what you've become, in terms of the entrepreneur and having your own business, or what drove you?
No way. I wish my only dream was to play for England football, but that was a very unlikely objective, quite frankly.
So how did it sort of like materialize then that you...
Well, the early treatment affected my education quite badly because it continued until I was about 7.
And this is the treatment for scoliosis, because
that you had being swung by the neck, put in a rack, and then put in a plaster cast each night with 3 leather and metal straps tight. They now know that treatment doesn't work. It's caused by a growth on your right side being much stronger than the left, which pulls it over, right? And by 7, with gentle exercises, it self-corrects. So Professor Sir Alan Craft, when over dinner, said to me, "You're very, very right dominant," which is absolutely right. I couldn't kick a ball with my left foot for my life. So he said it would have pulled it over.
Any
slightly.
Excuse, Peter.
And at 7, it gradually would have corrected. So now they don't do that treatment.
Yeah. If I read rightly, I think it said that you were an extra long the condition is being an extra long baby.
That was the theory, but he said your muscle growth was quicker on the right than left, which can happen. And that will pull it over. And it looks like as long as it's not beyond 10 degrees, they'll leave you alone now.
And because of that, you were a later developer potentially at school because you had all the treatment going on.
I could hardly read and write when I was 6 and 7. And there is some evidence that being put through that trauma each day, 3 times a day at Great Ormond Street, who were doing their best at the time, and at home with a group of about 20 women doing the treatment, that it can affect your short-term memory. But funnily enough, my working memory has always been good. So there's a now distinction being made in psychology between short-term. If you give me random digits like a telephone number, I'm absolutely hopeless.
Is that right?
But I was okay at remembering dates in history, which is most peculiar. But then again, you know, what we know about the human brain is minuscule, basically.
And the other thing there, Peter, about your childhood was I loved the stories of young Peter. This concept, I think one of your family called you Tommy Trouble because
that was my grandfather.
I think they often say very bright children, you know, have obviously a lot of energy and can be mischievous to some extent.
Well, not when I set him alight. He wasn't too pleased about that. I put an electric fire behind him, plugged it in, and then the Hessian back caught fire. And my father said he would have won the 100 yards if he moved out of the house. But he never had any. He had 3 daughters, so he always called my mother Bill, which I never understood. So basically, although he called me Tommy Trouble, he looked after me a good deal.
Right. The other thing that made me laugh as well was this. I think you were described as a 3 or 4-year-old pushing a pram down the street and ended up sort of running into somebody and ended up in the police station somehow.
It was an older lady that was quite wide in the beam, and I insisted on pushing it against my father's better judgment. She was bending over to do a shoelace, and I banged into her. She went flying. She got up off the floor screaming. I then ran away. My father then panicked, like any father does, looking all over Wembley High Street for me. Then about 2 hours later, went to the police station to find me sitting there in the police station. They're saying we can't get anything out of him. You can't get his name other than it's Tommy Trouble. And
that your childhood, I think the other thing that, you know, struck me was the vivid way you bring some of these characters to life. You know, it is, I used the words and I meant it, you know, I felt transported by this book, you know, into your life and into your story, you know, and just the way I could picture some of these characters. I love the way you talk about being at QPR as a young boy. I believe you'd been a lifelong fan since the age of 5. And I saw that your dad used to help with the takings and he got you involved as well, didn't he? Which sounded a bit dangerous.
I used to work on the boys' styles, and then he'd lock me up, and then I'd go and watch the game, and I get a cup of tea and a donut at half time. But actually, when I got to about 13, I started playing myself on a Saturday afternoon. So I went less then, but went more to their evening games because I was playing myself every Saturday.
And then obviously it sounded like you quickly caught up at school.
I was so-called late developer, it was called. So I was taken at 13 and put in a grammar school where they selected right across Surrey, literally from Kingston in the north to Gatwick and nearly in the south. So we were put in a special stream because our headmaster, called Len Bradbury, who had played for Man United actually before the war at the school, at our school, the head, was, I think, chair of Stop the 11 Plus campaign, arguing that the development of children between 11 and 13 can be considerable. In fact, if you look at the data on this, the correlation between 11 and 13 in non-verbal ability, intelligence, is only about 0.64, which means for a 95% confidence, you can have as much as 18-point swing either side of a score 11 versus 13. But we were selected from all over for the county. It's rather suspicious that 6 of us actually played at that level of football. So the school was never defeated for about 12 years.
Just as well you're a good footballer then, isn't it? Otherwise, who knows what
Oh,
might
well, it was
happen.
okay. Some of my friends were better and played pro football later. But my old school I was put into before moving to the secondary modern to the grammar school. There were fights every day. It was unbelievable. But when we played them at football, we won 27-1.
Wow.
Yeah,
I bet you were disappointed about the one word.
even our goalkeeper got 7 goals. But actually, in the grammar school, that although they were quicker, stronger, bigger, and whatever, there was never a fight in the playground. In the secondary modern that I first went to, it was like war every day. But I don't regret that in being in the two systems.
And tell us what. So was it at school then you started to get interested in psychology? How did that come along?
I decided to go to Nescott, which was then Ewell Technical College near Epsom, to do my A levels rather than stay on at school. And one of the guys was going on about Freud one morning over break, and he seemed to be talking things which seemed strange to me. So I went up to the actual library at Ewell Tech, or Nescott as it is now, and picked up some American books on psychology. And I always had a dilemma because my best subjects at O level were maths, physics, chemistry, English, history, geography. So in those days, I wanted to do maths and English, but it wasn't allowed. They clashed in the curriculum. So I had to choose between the two. So the head said, oh, well, you then take English, history, politics, etc. So I did that. But I came back to maths when I went to psychometrics, when I decided to apply to University of Leicester to do psychology. When I saw the books in psychology, I was so engrossed because the child development, learning, individual differences, clinical psychology and so on, experimental design, the stats that was involved at the time, it appealed to me immediately. I was thinking of doing history, but as soon as I read the few psychology books, that was a subject for me.
And how did that lead into, the formation of your first company? How did you move from being psychologist to actually suddenly having your own business?
I was lucky enough to get a job. I applied at the National Foundation for Educational Research as a research assistant. I was lucky enough to get that job. And I joined as an assistant psychologist, and Professor Stephen Wiseman, who had come down from Manchester to be a director, he then promoted me to psychologist and then principal and then chief psychologist at the test division. So I had 8 years learning my trade there, learning about psychometrics. People would ask questions, not just in the occupational space, but also in the clinical and educational. So I retain that interest to this day. So I was working on reading tests, for example, and clinical tests, as well as occupational ones. But what happened was I was being asked more and more to go outside and give talks on selection tests for companies like Mars, companies like the then British Leyland and so on, Jaguar, to run 1 day or 2 day courses on the use of test in selection. And I was allowed to do that with my contract. And then I was going to go out on my own, and I went to see Roger Holdsworth for advice, and he suggested we form a company together. So
Saville Holdsworth, pretty good negotiator, Peter. So you had 65% and he had 35%.
He offered that because he was only interested in a test publishing business. And all of the training income would come to me, and all the consultancy income that I did would come to me. So all that he did would go to him. He was 10 years older than me, and very different because Roger was Marlborough to Cambridge, not Stoneleigh East Secondary Modern, to Leicester.
I think I read about your differences and how you thought that he was more the flowery words type person, where you were the scientist, which must have been an interesting chemistry.
He was a good scientist, Roger, but he was an excellent accountant, very structured.
Always useful in business.
Yeah, indeed. And that was very useful to me because I'm notoriously unstructured.
So you built a business that got to 1,000 people. I mean,
Worldwide, yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's incredible. How
Yeah,
you know,
we never made any loss all the way through.
unbelievable.
Our
You know,
first year we made a profit.
what tips would you give to people listening to this about how you take, you know, an idea about something you're really passionate about, and that passion for the industry and for psychology and for helping people comes through very much in your writing. But how do you build that into something so significant?
I think the most difficult thing for somebody's entrepreneurial to take is the statement, "You were lucky." Yeah, I used to work from often 8 in the morning to 12 at night. When I was running courses, of course, I was running them from breakfast at 7:30 through to 12 o'clock at night, from Sunday till Friday evening. Now, in doing that, and they enjoyed the courses, I didn't know I was building up a sales platform. So when I resigned from the NFER, I was very surprised to find the phone ringing, and companies like Littlewoods, BP, etc., because the then NIIP had gone bust, was saying, we want a company in the UK to do occupational psychology. And they helped me find jobs almost for them, and also asked them to run more and more courses for them. And that income in our agreement would come to me.
I think the other thing, Peter, that comes out is just,
But after a year, Roger and I agreed to go 50-50 and put all the money into the company.
I saw as well the resilience that you obviously have. It wasn't always easy, right? You know, and the book's called Testing Times.
I'm actually not a very emotionally resilient person.
I mean, the first chapter is called Psychologists Behaving Badly, I think, and it's a really interesting detail around, I think, you and the board having a disagreement about how you had
they were trying to sack Roger, and I would not. They didn't want me to go, but and they asked me back later afterwards, but I would not, in principle, vote against my co-founder. And also, when you float a company, the bureaucracy that comes in is horrendous. And sitting there all day ticking boxes, that I knew I wasn't suited to be a PLC chairman. I was very happy as a private company. Roger was keen on floating the company. And I would say to anybody, if you're thinking of floating a company, think very carefully. Because the amount of paperwork, the amount of controls, the amount of bureaucracy, and also the people coming in, the lawyers, the accountants coming in who don't understand the business, and therefore you can't have a 1 or 2 year plan, makes it very difficult for the entrepreneur. And also things which were important were being thrown out, like we printed in color for the first time, which made the test look different that we produced. They started printing in black and white, so it didn't look any different from anybody else.
And I read about how the internet affected, you know, your offering.
Yeah, it was
about your
probably
concerns
a bad time
about
to
that.
float, quite frankly, because you know we were in pencil and paper, and round about that time we floated in 1997. We were around about 1995. We were looking at going on to internet supply, and that's been a headache for many CEOs, even to this day. And we were in new territory then, so probably that timing was not ideal.
So, SHL 240 million is floated for, I believe.
That was the value it went to, yeah.
Yeah, that is amazing. But you weren't happy with that, or maybe you were. I don't know. But you've gone again twice more. What's made?
They asked me back to. They asked me back. Came to my house in Esher in Surrey, and twice came back to ask me to rejoin. And I was very concerned about controls on the internet for cheating. And I said, well, if you didn't listen to me then, why should you listen to me now? So I refused politely. Nigel McGinley of the TIRAC, he's a charming man, came to see me because we got on well. I admire him greatly, and we had 2 meetings, and I basically decided that rather than turn the ship round, I'd rather start again, because I had some new ideas where I thought I could improve the OPQ. As it turned out, we did manage to do that. Then with the second company, which is Saville Consulting, now Saville Assessment, Towers Watson, an excellent company, offered us a price we couldn't refuse. I then left. Again, they asked me back. But again, I had ideas on where we can improve the validity and do things quicker than before by making some tweaks to what we had done. So really, it's like the Spitfire. I think 24 versions of that were produced in the end. Just gradual improvement and improvement.
This iteration, in trying to find the best. I mean, that does come across that you are a man of high standards, and I think you described as having revolutionized the modern, certainly from British psychology perspective, you've put us on the map, but you've revolutionized the whole industry, Peter, which is not bad sort of achievement when you think about your career. So thank you so much for being involved today. I enjoy
writing songs.
We got a couple of questions before we go, because as expected, we've rattled through half an hour already, right? Okay. Which is incredible. So I know now you're obviously chairman of 10X, your new organization. I think we've got Oliver Anderson, the CEO, talking as well at the conference, which we're really excited about.
He'll be talking about the use of machine learning and AI that we're using in selection. It's always worried me. 2 people get the same report from a personality questionnaire, and one will report it one way and one another way. What we need to do is have embedded validation to see, in fact, whether these interpretations are indeed correct.
Sure. A couple of questions from the audience. I'm going to choose my questions last, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to leave that for you. But firstly, question from the audience. From your experience, which do you prefer, the business world or that of academia and psychological research?
The business world.
Really?
Business world.
I was semi-surprised by that.
Well, we got access to groups that many academics couldn't get used to. But I was at my happiest in the training room, okay, with HR people. And then it was for 10 days of training, taking them through basic stats, which they couldn't understand before, and also training them. And it was good fun.
So making that impact that you could see.
Well, you go along and you're relaxed. You're in a training room. I don't like being stuck in an office, and I think I enjoyed that more than anything, as well as the test development.
Question from Caroline Foster. What is the one thing above all else that you recommend for a successful life and career? Big question.
Don't let your career overcome everything else, because one can become obsessed in it. It can absorb you too much. So the amount of hours I've spent in my career, I have missed the growing up of some of my children, especially when I was abroad so much. I think in something like 60 countries, developing the company, meaning I was away for 2 or 3 weeks. So that is one thing. When we built our international network, where they asked me to speak abroad, whereby I missed things at home, which I wish I hadn't missed.
I'm sure you're also hypercritical. I'm sure you were a great person to have in the family, Peter. Obviously, this is looking back. I'm interested. I mean, I saw your recent video about the Spitfire, which I'm insanely jealous about. That looked like an amazing experience. What else is left for you to do? What things would you love to achieve, or
well, the most
things you haven't yet done?
When the pilot in the front said, "Do you want to fly it for a while?" Of course, he could take control, but I mean that aircraft, you just moved it a centimetre to one side, it banked immediately.
What was that
So
like? It
was
must
a
have been
very
incredible.
but he did the victory roll, not me. Okay.
Right.
But he does let you fly it for a while, and it's an absolutely amazing aircraft. So it's just one of my life ambitions to do that.
So what's left? What are the other life ambitions to fulfill?
Other life ambitions to fulfill. Well, my life ambition to fulfill now is that 10x psychology is successful, and again we try and go for the hat trick.
Being
And
that
I'm sure we
successful
can,
footballer,
because
hopefully, I'm sure you will, mate.
we're actually taking a very different approach, in that we've got not just cognitive abilities and the personality, but well-being, engagement, motivation, and 360 all on one dashboard, which means HR don't have to look in different places for everything.
And finally, my question for you, might have to get ready for this. It's something I haven't prepped him for. What is your favorite QPR match of all time, and why?
Favorite match of all time. 1967, we were 2-0 down at Wembley against, I think, West Brom. And we came back. I was with my brother and my father at Wembley watching the game when I was at University of Leicester. And we got 3 goals in the second half, winning 3-2. And I think what happened was a guy called Alan was playing on the wing, was tearing us apart, and Stock, the manager, switched the fullbacks over, and the fullback knocked Alan nearly out of Wembley into Twickenham. And Alan was never seen again. And then Rodney Marsh got 2 goals, I think, and Lazarus got 1. So we were losing 2-0 at half time, and we won 3-2.
I didn't realise you had Rodney Marsh playing for you. Was that before you went to Chelsea or?
Yeah, Fulham.
Fulham, great player. Well,
yeah, Rodney Marsh was before Rodney Marsh. I mean, after Rodney Marsh, it was Stan Bowles that really took over as the favourite at Loftus Road.
Another great player.
Yeah.
Well, as expected, we've already run out of time. Thank you so much for today. And for those like watching, genuinely, you have to read Peter's book. It is such an amazing story, both in terms of a life experience, growing up in a family and coming through in sort of West London, and then through to sort of being an amazing business
watch the
person.
White City Estate. Be careful there.
Well, I was reading about, we can't talk about it now, we probably don't have time, but that dark character, you know, the gangster.
Indeed. But he was good to me, thank goodness.
Just as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you want to find out more about, you know, what could be a 3-hour conversation in terms of Peter's life, you must read that book, Testing Time, Psychologist at Work. And I believe Peter is imminently about to be released. Is that right?
It is. We've got the pre-pub copies coming literally in the next hour.
Thank you so much. And I wish you all the best for 10x for the hat trick. And you never know what comes after that, the quadruple maybe.
I don't know about that.
Thank you so much, mate. You have a great day. And Peter, if you don't mind, there are some questions obviously in the app. If you and Rich have a chance to have a look at those and maybe share some of your thoughts outside this, that'd be fantastic. Professor Peter Saville, everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.